What's going on, Bucs fans? Back here again at another episode of the Pirate Parlay podcast here on the Sick Podcast Network. I'm your host, JC Allen, and we've got another special guest on here today. All draft month, we're getting these draft experts from all around the beat. And today I'm real excited for the one we've got on now. He is the mastermind behind probably the best of draft, whatever you want to call it. A Bible, if you want to call it a Bible, if you want to call it a preview, a draft guide. It's the best one out there, and I'm super excited to get into and break that down with him. And of course, talk your Tampa Bay Buccaneers and who could they be focusing on the number one draft pick, pick 19 in the first round. We're just less than 2 weeks away, so we're ramping up. So we'll get into all that and more after the break.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Pirate Parlay.
Battle intercepted, picked off in the end zone. Bucs are going to beat the Chiefs. We're the champions of the world.
The sickest Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. It's going to be sick.
Back here on the other side, I want to thank everyone for tuning in again to an edition of Pirate Parlay podcast here on the Sick Podcast Network. Everyone, do me a favor, take a second to like, subscribe, turn notifications. And if you're listening in this podcast format, appreciate you guys as well. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right into it. Let me bring him in. He works for The Athletic. He's a draft guru over there, I'll say. The mastermind behind what is known as the Beast, the best draft guide out there in the land. And I know he'll be modest and say others are great, but truly, this is the best. Dane Brugler, how are we doing, my man?
No, it's the best. I'm just kidding. Like, so much goes into it that the feedback has been so cool to hear. I mean, it's just a lot of people do really amazing jobs when it comes to covering the draft, and just try to be up there with the best of them. I take a lot of pride in the fact that the Beast is the only place where you're going to get testing, NFL verified testing information for almost 2,600 players. A lot of the background nuggets from all these players, I think you're not going to find anywhere else. And I think that's what separates the Beast from others, is just the level of detail, that we go into with this. And so, yeah, if you're a casual draft fan or a diehard, I promise you there's something in there that you will really enjoy. And so, yeah, if it's included with your Athletic subscription, so hopefully people check it out.
Yeah, and all new interface, which has been fun to use. I still prefer the throwback, the old school. You print it out, you flip through the pages, but
that's on there too. There's a PDF. We get best of both worlds. There's a PDF. Absolutely. If you want to do that, PDF. If you want to, because a lot of people use their tablets and phones, and so we wanted to try and make it accessible for everybody this year. And so very proud of the resources we threw behind it. And so, yeah, but you're right. A lot of people do enjoy the PDF where they can print it out, or it's just easily accessible that way. It's more of a when you go to a grocery store and see it on the magazine stand, that type of thing. So, it's a cool 500 pages. So it's a big publication, but there's not any wasted space in there. It's all good stuff.
No, it's not, and it's got so much great information. And really, once you get into it, the intricate details of why this player excels at this, or why he needs to work on that, all that stuff in there, what position he's best suited for. Yes, he might have played at offensive tackle, but now he's better suited as a guard or a center. And that's how teams, it's things that you're hearing too. That's how teams are seeing him. Really puts everything in perspective, and actually kind of where, and there's variables, but where you're going to see a lot of these guys end up going on draft days. So doing that, I know you're keeping teams in mind as you're kind of going through and building the top 100, because of course you put out your own separate mock drafts. I saw you with Mina Kimes the other day. You didn't really get to pick someone. She gave you some two options. You took Jahdae Barron. Let's start there. I like him a lot. I had him in my last mock draft. What was it about him that you like for the Bucs? Pick 19 in the first round.
Yeah, I liked it. Don't love it, just because I question. I like Jahdae Barron a lot as a nickel corner. Question is, okay, can he truly be an outside guy? I think he can do it, but can he do it at a high level that you would expect drafting him top 20? I think that's the question mark with him, because obviously I think the Bucs feel good about Tyke Smith as their nickel in that secondary. McCollum's he's last year of his rookie deal, so it's like, okay, and then the outside depth behind him. and Jamel Dean. It's like, okay, what is our outside depth? We feel like we can get better there. Do we need to find a future starter, for McCollum? So there's some question marks at outside corner. And so I think it just comes down to, with Jedi Barron, do you believe he's a nickel corner only, or do you believe he truly has that versatility where, you can play him outside, you can play him safety some, put him in the box, you can do all these things like they used him at Texas, but he's a little bit undersized, doesn't have great length. So there are some question marks there. It's not a clean evaluation necessarily, but I think he's an easy player to like, where you're going to find a spot for him and let him impact the back end of your defense.
No, I think when we're talking about the Bucs here at 19, I think it's really come down to three consensus players that it seems that analysts continue to have, and for good reason, that the Bucs are going to take, and that's Jihad Campbell, Malachi Starks, and Donovan Ezeraku from the edge rusher from BC. What about those three players? Did you maybe find interesting when you were scouting, or hear something interesting about them? We've heard their scouting reports, their pros and cons, but what's something maybe interesting you found out about those guys? And why do you think those three are trending as the biggest fits and logical choices for them in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, Campbell makes sense being, you think about, okay, Levante David going into age 35 season. So it's like, okay, you bring in a guy like this who, with Jihad Campbell, who the athlete, you see the ability, the instincts are good, but they're still developing. And so you bring him in with David still in the fold, where you can kind of a passing of the torch type of season, where Levante is still playing at a high level, but you get him in a position where he can help bring and develop a guy like Campbell along, who has more talent than maybe necessarily in terms of his instincts. Like that's kind of the hang up for teams, is he's not the most instinctive right now. He's getting there. He's developing in terms of his keys and what he needs to be focusing on. But you don't get as many tackles as he did without just being lucky, or with just being lucky. You obviously have speed, you have range. So, and Campbell, remember, he was an edge rusher mostly in high school, and then he made the switch to more of an off-ball player at Alabama to get on the football field. And so, it's certainly understandable that he is developing as he sees things for the first time. So I think that makes a ton of sense. Donovan Ezeraku, he is for a guy that doesn't necessarily look that big, how long he is and how long he plays with, that really blows you away, because he looks smaller just when you on the hoof, but then you see his arm length and you see the way that he uses that length, where he can dip and go around you, but he can also put his hands into your chest and get that speed to power and create that push at the point of attack. So, he's a guy that is still young too. He's a fourth year senior, but still just 21 years old. He is a younger player for his class. And then the production, there's no arguing against it. He's a guy that had over 20 tackles for loss this year, over 16 sacks. So you put everything together, okay, tested, no 40, but he still tested pretty well in the other drills. He's the production check, the length check, has a lot of the traits. He's a bendy athlete. So there's a lot of things that you like, and you can understand why teams in the top 25 would be looking at this player. He's going to go in the first round. It's just a matter of where. I could see him going 32 to the Eagles, or as early as, say, 15 to the Falcons. I think anywhere in the back half of round one makes sense.
And then Malachi Starks is another one of those.
Yeah.
Is it too early to take him as a safety, but he can also play nickel? I'm hearing the Bucs think that, maybe he could do some stuff outside as well. He's probably one of the better players in the draft if we're going based off like blue chip prospects and stuff like that. But are we still scared to take a guy like this in the first round? You look at the last couple seasons, even going back to Antoine Winfield Jr. is more of a safety, but can play that all-around role. But Brian Branch, last year, Cooper DeJean, these guys tend to fall out of the first round. Is this the year that kind of changes with Starks? And are the Bucs the team to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a unique year where the talent in from picks 15 to 50 they're all pretty similar in terms of the grade.
Right.
There's not a lot of differentiating factors between those guys, and it's different from team to team. Obviously, everyone's gonna have their favorites, and how you stack them is gonna be different. Team need to be weighted, their scheme will be weighted. Malachi Starks, like honestly, his 2024 it didn't meet the hype. He was fine. He did a nice job. Some tapes were better than others. He had trouble with tackles or with tackling, being a better finisher on the Alabama tape. He had that amazing interception in the opener against Clemson. That was his only interception the entire year. Didn't have a ton of on-ball production. And so, ideally when you're drafting a safety in the first round, you want a guy that gets his hands on the football, and Sarks just didn't do that at a high level this year. And so I think that's part of the hang-up. And he didn't test all that great. The testing was average. And so, I'm more than willing to just trust the tape and what he did, because they played him as a nickel. They play him at more of in the post. They play him single high. They do all these different things with him that I think they kind of stretched him thin. And I think you want to get him in one spot, let him just see the field, go and make plays, play loose, play confident. And I don't think he was always able to do that this past year. So, the testing's not great. The production's okay, not great. So I think you really have to trust the tape with this player, and I'm more than willing to do that. He's my 21st overall player, something like that. So I mean, he's right there in that conversation for me. But I understand why a team would be like, we'll get our tackle here. Let's get our pass rusher here. We'll wait for safety later on. But he's also one of the better interviews this year in terms of personality, in terms of intangibles, the way he carries himself. Coaches love him, teams love him, and that's something that will certainly help him when we get to draft night.
This is the time of year where I like to say we start catching up to draft boards instead of players are shooting up the board.
Right.
Two of those guys who are kind of in the talks for the Buccaneers potentially at 19 or maybe a trade down, Trey Amos and Matthew Golden, surprisingly, who they brought in for a 30 visit. What are we just finding out about these guys that are making them appear to be kind of climbing the ranks so fast? And what do you like about both of these guys that could potentially be fits with the Buccaneers?
Well, and I think both understandable why they were maybe steady risers throughout the process. I mean, you take Amos at this point last year, he was a 6th, 7th round pick. He was at Alabama struggling to get on the field, playing behind Kool-Aid McKinstry, Terrion Arnold, two guys that were drafted last year. And, in most years, he's going to the draft. He'd be a late round pick, but he takes advantage of the COVID year and is able to transfer, goes to Ole Miss, becomes an all SEC corner. You see the ball production. So the season, okay, put good play on tape. Then he goes to Senior Bowl, has a good week there, goes to the combine. And for a guy that's, 6'1", 195 pounds, go and run in the 4.43, okay, all of a sudden, some of those speed questions, all right, check that box. And then talking to a scout that was at his pro day, he called it one of two best corner pro days that he has seen during this cycle, just with the way the movement skills, the way, read, react, the way he can gather himself, high point, all these different things you want a corner to do in space. He did them at a high level. And so talk about a guy that just crushed the process. That's Trey Amos. And so if he ends up somewhere in the top 25, top 30, again, I think you understand why that happened and why he was just a steady riser throughout the entire process. With Golden, it was kind of similar where, he was a transfer from Houston. So he was coming in, going through this Texas offense where all the hype was around Isaiah Bond. All the hype was around these freshman receivers that Texas had brought in. Golden was a little bit of an afterthought, at least in the public consciousness. And in just the way he was used as well. And so, but later in the year, it became pretty clear who their best receiver was, and cream rises to the crop, right, or to the top, right? And that was the case with Golden, who down the stretch, what he did the last 4 or 5 games really stood out to NFL scouts. And then he goes to the combine, runs a 4.29. Does he play a 4.29? No, not necessarily, not consistently, but I don't think speed is an issue for him. Goes to the pro day and just blows away the scouts and the teams that were there with the way he worked out, the way he moved. And I think that's what I like most about him is the feet, the hips, the eyes, the shoulders, everything's in sync when he runs his routes. And so he's able to gain those pockets of separation and give his quarterback a target because of how synchronized he plays. And so you can see why he's in that conversation to be one of the first, if not the first receiver drafted. And who knows, he might be off the board by the time, it comes time for the Bucs to pick. And but that would be a surprise, right? If they took a receiver. I mean, I know Mike Evans, he's getting up there, and this could be his last year in Tampa. Who knows? But with Godwin and with
They,
McMillan and what he has done, like it'd be a surprise if they went.
it
I'd be
would.
surprised if they went non-defense, I guess, because that defense needs some help. And so if they went anywhere other than defense with this, maybe their first 2 or 3 picks, I think I'd be a little bit surprised.
I agree, but they seem really adamant on adding a wide receiver. And Bowles has mentioned multiple times throughout this offseason that he lived that life last year. Remember, they had lost Godwin, they lost Evans, and then all of a sudden they lost Jalen McMillan right before that Chiefs game. And Sterling Shepard is your number one, and he's banged up as it is. And now you got Ryan Miller catching touchdowns to send the game into overtime, So, like, they've lived that life too, and I don't know if they trust. They've had 2 years of Trey Palmer, 2 years of Raheem Jarrett, and just haven't seen anything. Jarrett hasn't been able to stay healthy. Palmer hasn't been able to put together. I feel like, and Shepard was he was retired last year before Baker called him. So I think they are truly worried about. All right, let's hope that nothing happens in CG's progression, which sets him back. But also, they've got 2 of their other guys missed time last year too. So I would be shocked, but I would get the rationale, and Bowles keeps saying we need more horses in there. So you don't take a horse in the 5th round, you take a horse early on. So, and they brought in Elick Ayo Manor and Jalen Knoll for visits as well. So interesting there. As far as you mentioned, Amos had one of the best corner pro days. I want to was Siobhan Revel up there as far as someone who can just moves like a cornerback, because I know you're a little bit lower on him, but it seems like he's making a push to maybe have his name in that conversation. Buccaneers brought him in for a visit as well. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, he's still not able to work out because of the ACL, but in terms of movement skills and speed, he has it. And he's one of the best stories in this draft in terms of where he came from. Injured a lot in high school, didn't have the grades to go Division I, so goes to JUCO, and that's right when COVID hit, so no season. And he was working at Amazon at an overnight fulfillment center, just trying to make ends meet. And he worked an overnight shift, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m., and then a couple hours later is in the car to East Carolina for a tryout. And his dad sent me the video because his dad was in the stands. He sent me a video of a coach tracking down Siobhan with the stopwatch, just kind of show him what he ran in the 40. And so that got him a scholarship at ECU. Then he has this tremendous 2023 season. And that put him on this in my initial top 50 back in August. He was 12th. I mean, that's where he started. And then in September has the ACL. And it's like, oh man, I mean, how much heartbreak can this kid take? And so that really, eliminated his senior year. No testing. Wasn't able to work out for teams before the draft. But I mean, he's right there in that second round, late second round range. It just, what's the knee look like? He's a really lean athlete, and so maybe you kind of worry about injuries piling up on him, but you love the speed, you love the ball skills. There's just so much to work with there.
Yeah, and the Bucs love that too. I mean, remember Yaya Diaby in the 3rd round? Guy was working at the airport, playing at Georgia Military, and then all of a sudden finds his way to Louisville and to the Buccaneers. So they love those stories too. If you had any surprise kind of maybe through a trade down situation in the 1st round, is there anyone that would surprise you that the Bucs went? I know they brought in Darius Alexander, who's getting some love there. I think if they did go the wide receiver route, Emeka Ubuka, I think, is another guy. Benjamin Morrison is going to be interesting because he's a 1st rounder all day without the hip injury. His hips were kind of tight a little bit before, and so that's I think where the real concern is. He had a little bit of tight hip issue, couldn't really, flip them as fluid as some of the other corners in the class before. Now you got a hip injury. What does that look like at the pro level? But anybody else kind of in your mind jump out as I might play around with this as a Bucs pick?
Yeah, well, I actually graded him as an early 2. More talking about Benjamin Morrison before the injury. He's. I like him, didn't love him as other, and this is his 2nd hip surgery that he's had since high school, and so it's just a little, I don't know what you do with that. It's tough, and I think some teams may be a little more aggressive, other teams maybe allergic to risk with how you do that. So yeah, Morrison and kind of like Ravel are a little bit tough, where they'll be drafted top 75 somewhere. But is
Right.
it could they get into the top 50? Are they gonna be more like late 2, early 3? I don't know. We'll have to see how that plays out. They play a premium position, and teams are gonna bet on that. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that this is a really strong defensive line class. So if they traded down, what does that look like? Mikael Williams from Georgia, is he in that conversation? What are the defensive linemen? Whether it's Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, and if they did go offense, say in the second round, a guy like could they address tight end as maybe where you find that pass catcher, maybe a more dynamic tight end, whether it's Mason Taylor from LSU, Elijah Arroyo from Miami. Maybe they want another horse. Well, maybe it looks a little bit different, and it's that as a tight end who can also serve as a slot receiver and be a flex guy and be moved around the formation. And
Right.
I know they have bodies there, but maybe not an explosive type of tight end. That's a possibility for them. So, I think they're in a position where they have a playoff roster, but what's going to get them over the hump? Where do they see that? And I would assume it's going to be defense, whether that's a long-term succession plan at linebacker, somebody that can help get to the quarterback. Because I know you brought in Hassan Reddick, but he's in his age 31 season. I mean, it's just a 1-year contract. So I mean, you're in obviously Diaby. You feel good about him. Chris Braswell, I feel like we haven't seen his best just yet, but still an unproven asset. Getting more pass rush, I think, has to be high on the list. Whatever that looks like, it could be a Jihad Campbell, where again, he was a pass rusher in high school. So okay, you draft a linebacker, he's your long-term linebacker, but you work him in third down packages, passing scheme, where you can let him pin his ears back and go, different things like that. So I think I'd like to see him get a little creative, where how you're creating that pass rush, and maybe that dictates where exactly they go in the first round.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. You can never have enough pass rushers, and even as you mentioned with Hassan Reddick, if he does break out, now he's going into his 32 season. Are you going to want to pay him the $20 million he's going to be looking for? That kind of similar deal to, what the guy, I can't think of his name right now. San Diego used to be the Bears, used to be with Khalil
Khalil
Mack.
Mack,
You
yeah.
know, are you going to pay Khalil Mack money for a guy like Hassan Reddick going into age 32 to have a guy there and then have that rotation of Braswell and another guy in this year along with Diaby? That could bear some good dividends going forward. I want to ask you 2 questions about the Beast. First, when was the last time, or has the NFL stumped the Beast as far as taking a prospect that wasn't on there at all? It's hard to do because you go deep, or maybe just
Yeah.
didn't have a write up on.
Yeah, I mean, once or twice a year, there'll be a guy drafted that I didn't have because I do write ups. There's 2,600 players in the Beast. I do write ups on 400 of them. Once or twice a year, there will be a player that's drafted who maybe just dominated his pro day or something. Like didn't have draftable tape, but dominated the pro day, and so he sneaks in there. Or maybe the late riser that I didn't catch up to him. I didn't talk to enough teams, but there's always one or two. The last time a player was drafted who wasn't in the Beast at all, it was Jeff Swaim. Almost 10 years ago now, the Cowboys drafted him in the 7th round out of Texas, tight end. And it was that moment that I was like, all right, well, I'm not letting this happen again. I'm going to make sure. And sometimes it was tougher this year with you've got COVID years, you got guys, the transfer portal, like you're able to go back. Like it's a little bit tougher to keep track of who's where or what, it's so that part is a little more work on my end to do it. But yeah, I think it's in good shape.
You just kind of made a question right there with the transfer portal. How difficult is it to have to reach out to someone at this school and that school and this school, in some case 3 schools, all for just one player to try to get a little bit of tidbit of who they are as a person, character, kind of whatever.
Yeah, and it's our new reality. I mean, this is just how college football is. A transfer 10 years ago means a lot different than a transfer in this day and age. So I think just understanding the why. Some guys transferred to challenge themselves and face better competition, and so you have to admire that. And so if you felt like you've gotten everything you could out of a certain situation and you want better for yourself, who am I to say that's not the right thing to do? And so every case is different. You want to paint with a broad brush. You want to understand the why, and I think that's really important for all of these cases. So, but it's the new normal. It's NIL, that's a factor now too, and what that means. Yeah, it's kind of the wild west out there.
With that, what do you think that does for kind of what just happened with the whole Tennessee quarterback there?
Yeah, I mean, it's unprecedented, right? I mean, yeah. Well, if I'm an NFL team, I'm like, all right, well, this is good to know. Like he's not even in the NFL yet, and he's already holding out for more money. And you could argue maybe he didn't necessarily earn it with what he put on the field. So, look, I'm never going to tell a player or person that, hey, don't try to get what you're worth. Go for it. But it's not a great look that I know Tennessee made the playoffs, but what he put on the film is not. I don't think you have the leverage to say, hey, I deserve more money, more than $4 million or whatever, unless he heard from other schools that are saying, hey, we'll gladly pay you 4.5 or 5 to come to our school. So maybe if he's heard that, then he feels like he has leverage. But it just speaks to the overall problem with the lack of rules in place to govern such a like I said, wild west. I mean, that's kind of how it is. And I mean, I'm not going to fault a player for getting paid and take care of his family. But there's no question we need some type of set of rules or guidelines to help these guys and help schools and just protect everybody.
Okay, last one. Besides Ravel, who was your favorite prospect to learn about, write up, watching film, whatever? Or if you don't have just one, who are your favorites to kind of break down this year?
No, I mean, there's so many. Like I said, that's why I love the Beast, is learning about all these journeys. Jamari Caldwell, the defensive tackle from Oregon, who I've heard of walk-ons and I've heard of JUCO guys, but you rarely get the walk-on at the JUCO. But that's what Jamari Caldwell was. He didn't give up on his dream, walked on a JUCO, and was able to translate that into a scholarship at Houston. And then was able to translate that into a scholarship at Oregon. And, he was a 3 technique at Houston. They moved him to 1 technique at Oregon, playing next to Harmon, who's going to be a first-round pick. And I think a team's going to get an interchangeable defensive tackle. He can play the nose, can play the 3, can be a gap penetrator. And, he's an older player, but I probably won't go until day 3. A team's going to get tremendous value with him.
Nice. I didn't know that about him. That's awesome. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Dane. I want to let you go ahead, promote yourself real quick. I think you've got a mock coming out soon. So go ahead, promote yourself, tell people where they can find you and why they need to get into the Beast as soon as possible.
7-round mock coming out on Wednesday on The Athletic. But again, check out the Beast. Again, if you like the draft at all, I promise you won't be disappointed. It's the best resource out there for everything draft, all in, one-stop shop type of thing. So you can find it on The Athletic.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you so much. I know you stay busy, so enjoy your downtime once this is all done, because I know it's not much before you're diving into next year's Beast. So appreciate everything. Appreciate your time. Keep crushing it, man.
Anytime. Appreciate it.
There you guys have it. Dane Brugler. He is the first and foremost encyclopedia for anything you need on the NFL draft with the Beast. It's amazing. It's out on Athletic now. It's worth a subscription alone just for that. So definitely check that out. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to another edition of the Pirate Parlay podcast here on the Sick Podcast Network. We'll be back live Wednesday at 7 p.m. I will have special guest Ryan Fowler of the Draft Network. He just dropped a mock. See who he's got the Bucs taking. We'll get into another live mock draft with your feedback as well in the comments. And we've got a few more shows before the draft actually kicks in. Super excited about that. A lot of stuff going on. Check out my personal Twitter page as far as rankings, breakdowns, all that stuff. And of course, excellent content from Pirate Parlay podcast as well. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you guys on Wednesday. Peace out.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Pirate Parlay on YouTube, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.